will be from Konstantinos from Syriza.
Right, so thank you very much for the invite. It is especially valued on such a day like that, and best of luck for the rest of the conference apparently. So I was asked just to do a brief presentation about social movements and their relation with the political left in Greece, and how this interplay led to Greece having its first left-wing government in its history, practically. So I will just do, a rough division between things happening before and after the election of Syriza, and I will try to reflect on how things might have changed. So very, very briefly and very, very schematically, if I had to describe how this dynamic evolved socially, I would say that there were two broad strands that somehow met. On the one hand, a large part of what we would commonly understand as working class, which was traditionally associated with the Socialist Party, at some point got 120% disillusioned. People understood that they had nothing to expect from the Socialist Party, because the Socialist Party was actually the party that pushed through perhaps the most intense austerity program that has ever been implemented in a Western state. So that's the one strand. On the other hand, there was always a large part of the youth, people of roughly my age, but people a bit older than me, younger than me, that had been traditionally very, very skeptical towards politics. And when I say politics, I don't only mean party politics, but all kinds of politics. These began to be challenged through, for example, a number of very important student mobilization that's happened in 2006, 2007, when actually students occupied universities. And when I said occupied, I am quite literal about it, in the sense that there were no classes going on pretty much for a year. And that was to stop the amendment of our constitution, which wanted to permit private universities. So again, the same way that is happening here was actually a struggle over a social good. We didn't want more money, for example. We wanted to keep our universities, our higher education public both in terms of not paying fees, but also public in the sense of not allowing the mere logic of profit and the mere logic of managerialism to enter our universities, because we all know that the moment this logic starts infiltrating more and more spheres, there's no way to stop it. It will just keep expanding, and everything will become privatized, either directly or in terms of its real management. So where did these two strands meet? Well, these two strands largely met in the squares movement. In a movement that no one saw coming. And when I say no one, I include the political left, and I include Syriza. When the first demonstration was called, in all honesty, I turned up expecting to see the familiar 2,000 people I saw in every demonstration in Greece. Instead of that, I saw something like 50,000. And the next time there were 100,000, and Sunday actually it rose up to 500,000 in a city of 4 million. So pretty much one out of the 8 people you knew actually were there demonstrating with you. And at the same time, and that is a thing of direct interest to you, in Thessaloniki, which is the second biggest city of Greece, a very vibrant movement began to stop privatization of water. And it was a successful movement. And semi-official / unofficial referendum was actually conducted by the movement. And I think around 100,000 people voted against the privatization of the water service, and at that point both the government and the local government understood that they couldn't pursue this project further, and of course that allowed the current government of Syriza to actually still have control over our water resources in Thessaloniki, because that if that movement hadn't succeeded, and that's interesting, you know, to see the interplay between the two, if this movement hadn't succeeded, then the current government would have a public good less to handle and a tool less to actually conduct social policies. So that was very, very important. Also, and I'm closing here, what was quite unique, I think, for the Greek standards, and correct me if I'm wrong to an extent, for Western standards as well, was a gradual development of solidarity initiatives. So at some point it became evident to people that people could, of course, could struggle and should struggle, but at the same time they couldn't put any faith to the previous government to provide even for our most basic needs. So for example, people would set up solidar mini hospitals or solidar initiatives to provide tutorials to high school children who couldn't afford to have private tutorials, and in Greece without private tutorials, you know, you have to stand no chance to go to the university. People would set up informal, you know, time exchange, banks, and so on and so forth. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean that if you currently go to Greece there will be a solidarity initiative in every second corner. We are not there yet, but this thing developed, and I think it was particularly important that on the one hand, from a point on, there was clear that a demand for a different government was rising, but on the other hand, people, or at least a part of people, got disillusioned not only with the government, but also with the state. They started understanding that society can actually take initiatives on its own, and at some point a great part of our society understood, I think, and that's very important, that perhaps even the welfare state is not what we want. We might defend it for strategic purposes, and that's absolutely fine, but we can go and we can imagine things beyond the welfare state. And I think that was very valuable for Greeks. Also, to do some self-criticism here, not everything went so well, and there were people that were left behind. For example, we need to note that during this crisis, and even though women were one of the first victims of the crisis, there were steps taken back for the feminist movement, so there was no focus on how austerity and how poverty and neoconservatism specifically affects the women. And you can see that, for example, reflected in the fact that in the current cabinet there are very few women, and that's something even a leftist government should take very, very seriously. At the same time, for example, another very crucial issue that has been left behind was the LGBT movement, and that's why I'm very happy seeing the movement evolving here and seeing the debate about marriage equality evolving, and best of luck with that. So, about what is happening now. So, I will not discuss that much things about the negotiation with the EU, because I feel that you might have an overview of that. At a very basic level, the EU is not negotiating. There is a silent coup going on against the Greek government, and I think, like, in the future weeks, your solidarity and solidarity with other peoples of Europe will be very crucial. The EU is trying to suffocate our state financially, and I think within a few weeks or a few months at best, there will be a moment of direct confrontation. Just to give you a brief overview of things that have been happening after January, so we saw something which as far as I'm concerned, is perhaps unique in our history. We saw a number of pro-government demonstrations. I've never seen that again in my life, and I don't think I will see that again. So when the government was elected and the first days of negotiations were happening, there were people that gathered, and we're discussing up to 10-20,000 people, so we're not discussing just Syriza supporters. There were people that actually gathered outside the parliament, demonstrating, A, against the dominant forces of the EU, but B, also demonstrating against local elites, being political elites, or, very, very crucial, and I think that's crucial for your movement here, correct me if I'm wrong, also the media. The idea that the media had, from the first moment, initiated a sustained campaign against the government, which practically meant that they had also sustained, in a sense, you know, a campaign against Greece, in a sense, that they were wishing for Greece to do badly in the negotiations, and that's very, very interesting for the political forces that always play, you know, the patriotism card, and then they were wishing for the EU or for Merkel to crash the government. Nevertheless, and under these very strenuous conditions, the government until nowadays has managed to put through some very, very crucial reforms. I'm not claiming that this is enough. I'm not even claiming that austerity is over. It isn't, because that's a much more complicated process. But, for example, during the first weeks of the government, a bill went through that allowed electricity provision to be reconnected for impoverished families, because in Greece there were thousands of households that actually technically didn't have electricity. Some of them did, you know, circumventing the official process and so on and so forth, but there were thousands of impoverished households that didn't have electricity. We are discussing Euro 2015 here. Also, the €5 fee to be admitted to the hospital was abolished, which again, that was crucial for thousands of people, because we're discussing a country that minimum wage is around €600, so the €5 fee is a substantial part of your salary, and there have been cases that have been reporting about people postponing going to the hospital again and again and again because they couldn't afford it, and eventually when they were diagnosed it was too late. So that it's a small thing, but it can potentially be life-saving. Also, the process to hire a few thousand hospital staff, doctors and nurses, has been initiated, so the posts are advertised and will be filled shortly. And both these measures were essential because, and it's not an exaggeration, Greece, for Western standards, has been going through a humanitarian crisis. The current government used this slogan when, it was not government yet. It might sound like an exaggeration, it isn't. It is true that there were people that couldn't go to the hospital to go through even the most simple medical processes. I'm not even discussing more complicated. At the same time, and that's very crucial for Greece, that was on an authoritarian slippery slope, the current government tries to restore democracy and to restore civil and political rights. For example, a few days ago, a horrendous law that actually was voted in by the Socialist Party, excuse me, and had a provision that enabled compulsory HIV tests to be administered, especially to drug addicts, sex workers, and so on and so forth, was abolished. And that was a great moment of pride for anyone that has been involved to movements about women's movements, sex workers movement, about the most marginalized people in our society. And finally, and that's also a matter of European concern, immigrants have gradually been released from detention centers, where they were detained for months or for years just because they were undocumented immigrants. And we had many incidents of people actually committing suicide, and it was also our government that raised the issue about migrants and refugees dying in the Mediterranean in the EU, trying to avoid a militarization and securitization discourse and putting forward the humanitarian aspect of the question. So, to conclude, again, thank you very much for the invite. I think it's very, very crucial in such a period to exchange views, to exchange experience, to talk to each other with open minds about the things that are happening. And because, you know, Ireland is one of the places we are also looking at, because at the current moment we are very, very on our own in Europe. The only thing, you know, I might have to contribute is that, you know, this old good thing that it always seems impossible until it's actually done. Thank you.